You wanted to ask.
Sir, regarding recently this issue of Kashmir Files movie, sir, I came across this question that state is sponsoring that movie. They asked me that is it right the state to promote in aspect of one religion side, like how to deal with that issue question, sir.
See, there are many occasions when the governments at the state and national level give tax concessions, etc., to a film which they believe is educational. I remember long ago when we were all kids, or maybe we were at college, a film called Sudigundalu. The late NTR played the lead role in that film. Supposed to be an educational film, provocative and trying to raise some issues. It was given tax exemptions, etc. So it's not unique. Now, should there be some norms about this kind of a state patronage, tax exemptions, etc., or should be arbitrary is a different issue. I personally believe that it's better to have some kind of an independent body examining these issues and deciding which deserves that kind of a tax break. But as a principle, there's nothing wrong in promoting a certain set of messages which are universal and which are broadly in consonance with the constitution of the country.
Okay, sir, thank you.
Besides, you were telling that this is focusing on a particular part of the country. That is not true. It is focusing on a particular problem that the country has been facing for quite some time. So it is not about a part of the country, it is about a problem that is still live and that is still given a lot of importance by a lot of people in this country, whether they belong to that part of the country or from other parts of the country. So we should approach it in this manner.
Okay, sir, thank you.
In respect of this particular film, I have not seen the film, but there are two broad approaches to history. Take the Germanic approach. In the Second World War, you know the kind of things that happened. Germany never whitewashed over them. They honestly examine that, they remember that, and they make it a reminder for the future so that they will never commit the same mistakes again. Indian approach is to gloss over. In a country which is as diverse as India, we have very tortuous moments in our history, not only in the past 50, 70 years, but in the past 700, 800 years. Historians disagree on what is the best means. Is it better to simply pretend the past did not happen, or is it better to recognize what happened, but don't allow retribution to be dominant impulse today, but an understanding of the various strands of history? My own view is ultimately in the long term it may be better to recognize what happened and then reconcile rather than pretend it did not happen, because by and large our approach has been in the past 70, 80 years, it did not happen, we gloss over. That did not help the country. It actually, in my judgment, creates more discord in the long term and more hyperbole and more distortions in our understanding of history, and therefore more hatred and violence. But the other view also is a pretty significant view. We can't ignore it. Nevertheless, one thing is non-negotiable. You cannot ask somebody to pay for the past insults. Then how far back do you go? The Aryans invaded India. So do you punish all the people of Aryan genetic makeup? Some of you are doctors maybe. Or in fact the Africans, all of us in anthropology, somebody is anthropology, right? We all migrated from Africa, probably Rift Valley in Kenya or somewhere else, some 70, 80, maybe 100,000 years ago. All of us are from there. So if you go back and back and back, there's no end to this process. So you understand, that is to enrich your understanding and comprehension and compassion and reconciliation, not for retribution. This is a very, very important line. So I'm sure somewhere along the line, some of you will be asked this about the whole Kashmir Files debate. I haven't seen the film. I don't care whether it's a true depiction or not. After all, in a film you can take license. But these are events that happen in this country. Glossing over them is not perhaps the best response, but you can make your pick.
Sir, I will continue from here, sir. Again, I'm going to tell you something that may help you when faced with a particular type of question. See, what is history? History that we are reading in our textbooks. In Africa, there is a saying, as long as the hunter tells the story of the hunt, they will always glorify the hunter and the real story will never be told unless the lions are allowed to tell their stories. In India also, what has happened? See, earlier the British rulers and their henchmen, they wrote history, and after that we have seen history in our textbooks being written by historians of different types from different backgrounds. But what we read in history textbook today is the history of Delhi, number one, not the history of the rest of the country. So, who have ruled over Delhi? Number two, we have been told, if we read our history book, that we have always been controlled and ruled over, first by Mughals, then by British, but we were, and before that also, starting from Muhammad Ghari and so many Lodhis and so many Turks came and all that. Always India has always been invaded and ruled over and conquered and all. But we are never told that so many Indians have ruled over India. How many of us, many of you are from South India, but people from North India don't know much about Cholas, Chalukyas, Cheras, Satavahanas, the great Vijayanagaram Empire. Because we are from South, we don't know about, say, one famous Assamese general called Lachit Barphukan, who defeated the Mughal army. So, the real history unfortunately is still not told to us today. So, Kashmir Files also talks about a part of our history. So, when we read about history, the real perspective perhaps is not told to us. We must keep this in mind when you are faced with questions pertaining to history. Perhaps this background will help you. That, for example, there is a famous general in Kerala who defeated the Dutch East India Company, as a result of which the Dutch were massively defeated. That is why British East India Company could come and control India. Had he been defeated, perhaps he would have been speaking not in English but in Dutch. So, just it may be a diversion, but I just felt that whenever faced with questions on history, this perspective may please be kept in mind. Thank you.
In fact, his own region is a good example. Buddhism finally ended in Bengal, and the Delhi Sultanates sent their armies to crush them, and thousands of Buddhist monks were killed and many fled. That was more or less the last of Buddhism in India. We rarely hear about that. So, there is so much of rich diversity in our history, and please remember, the bloodshed and the arrogance or the intolerance was not limited to this community or that. In this part of the country, for instance, in those days, between the Shaivite and Vaishnavite kingdoms, there used to be tremendous bloodshed and hatred. What we now think is all Hindu, within that there were so many strands. So, that is the way it was throughout history, throughout the world. So, an understanding is not a bad thing, but trying to carry the grudges today, that is a dangerous thing. That is the only.
Sir, with respect to questions to take a stand between environmentalism and development. For example, if there is a tribal area or a forest area where there are huge reserves of bauxite available, and exploiting those resources can lead to development of some areas, whereas if we go by that path, we will be causing displacement of lot of tribals and also causing a lot of damage to environment. So, in such scenarios, what was the better approach to take?
I am biased here. On this issue, I am not impartial. When a country is desperately poor, while environmental concerns should be important at the back of our mind, economic growth is more important. But growth can be managed with least damaged environment. By definition, modernity and environment don't go together, including agriculture. Agriculture itself is modernity. Agriculture itself has damaged environment. Now, are we therefore going to say no agriculture? Once we have 7.8 billion population on planet Earth, we don't have the luxury like that idiot in Sri Lanka. Whatever, what's his name? Whatever Rajapaksa he is, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, all are Rajapakshas anyway. You have seen how devastating it is. So environment is important, particularly as we grow older, my generation, we understand for your generation, environment is very critical. But you have to have a very balanced approach to environment. Technology and modernity and growth in a responsible way are the answers to environment, not opposing economic growth and technology. For instance, truly today there are fantastic answers available to global warming. And you're all, most of you from engineering background, from technology. Not saying that no power, no electricity, not Luddism. You know Luddism? Luddites? Everybody knows about that? Raise hands those who haven't heard Luddites or Luddism. A fellow called Kevin Ludd, in the wake of industrial revolution in Britain, he gathered a group of young fellows and they went about destroying the machines because the machine age destroyed the old occupations. Every technological transformation destroys some old technologies. It's inevitable. Handlooms we're still facing. Mahatma Gandhi built a lot of his philosophy and his work around handlooms, for instance. But no matter what you do and say, handlooms are always in distress because new technology is overtaking old technologies. And therefore, rejecting new technologies is a very silly option. It's a very quaint, whimsical option. It doesn't have any serious relevance. How do you integrate? How do you see that the losers, they are integrated in the new economy? And if there is a market possible for the old things, how do you improve the market? You can't simply reject the new. None of us is wearing anything the old, right? And we're using the new technology. I'm not saying, look, because somebody is losing employment, I'll use the old technology. No. Book publishing has gone down thanks to this. I remember I used to do enormous amount of research when I was writing columns. I was writing 3-4 columns a week, more than professional writers. And I always took pride that there should not be a mistake when I said something. It was extremely hard work because I was traveling almost 20 days, 25 days a month, plus doing 100 other things. But today, this makes it so easy. And certainly, it has taken away many occupations of the past. So, land transfer regulations, tribal, non-tribal, scheduled areas, all these are issues. But economic growth in a responsible way is possible in today's age. If there is a mineral which is vital, whatever be the area, and if there is an economic value which is greater than the current value that is derived from that land, then we have no choice. Similarly, use of existing resources, water. I am myself a great friend of the farmers. I am widely known in the country and particularly in this part of the country as friend of the farmers. But I don't believe that when you build a dam or have water impounded, the first priority is agriculture alone. Agriculture where necessary. But if there is a greater economic use for the same quantity of water, greater value generated, greater employment created, then that has to have first priority. Drinking water must be the highest priority. So you must not have romantic notions. But it does not mean that there are going to be necessarily losers. And now we have the legal framework, we have the technological framework to ensure that that reconciliation is possible. But don't take an extreme position of many of the Jholawalas who don't want economic growth and incomes and ending poverty because they have some esoteric notions about Mother Earth and environment. So as I said, I'm biased. I'm taking a strong position. I'm uncompromising. I genuinely believe that every sensible public administrator must be equally uncompromising on this issue. I don't think you can say, no, I cannot do any minimal damage also to environment if there's a mineral wealth or something else. Because then that means we cannot administer. But again, if you feel differently, it's entirely up to you.
Yeah, I have my own take here. See, we have to go for cost-benefit analysis. Let us look at Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand, we know so many hydroelectric power projects have been launched there. At what cost? Over the last few years, we have seen the result. Not only in Uttarakhand, in many different parts of the world. Development came at a huge cost. And then also, whose development? That also we have to look at. So there are very strong both for and against views. So in my view, again, we must take a balanced approach. We should not feel very strongly that yes, development or yes, environment. We have to take a balanced approach everywhere. After looking at, it should be our view should be case specific. In this particular case, should we go for development or environment? In that particular case, what should be our approach? So everywhere there are consequences. When the consequence is so severe that development may be counterproductive, then we must take a view that is for the better good of the society living there. So that is again my view. I just felt.
Sir, when we are faced with situation-based questions, that is, one thing is related to corruption. There is ocean of knowledge and ocean of steps on what should be done to tackle corruption. But only in that 20 to 30 seconds, what should be our priority? Suppose we are said.
Give an illustration of the situation-based question you're talking about.
Yes, sir. Suppose I was appointed as a station house officer, and my subordinate is involved in corruption. Upon my first day of joining that office, I found that he is involving in corruption. What should be my course of action?
No, that's a very precise one. It's about, do you understand the law? Do you understand the procedure? Do you apply it? Therefore, the answer is straightforward. But very often it will be more complicated. It is systemic. Therefore, if I were the examiner, I would expect you to look at the bigger picture. Applying the law and punishing the fellow is the obvious option. But in a general sense, he is in charge of the vigilance operations in the state, or there may be somebody in charge of anti-corruption bureau. If you think anti-corruption bureau is the best way forward in every single case, then you will fail in tackling corruption. There are 4 or 5 broad areas. The first is eliminate monopolies, and therefore the state defining its role very clearly and allowing competition and choice to operate in areas where the state monopoly is not required is the most important driver against corruption. It may not appear dramatic or romantic, but that is the biggest fight against corruption. The moment telephones are allowed to be produced in private sector and competition and choice was there and technology came in, there is zero corruption, not because all the telephone companies are moral. Whereas earlier, I can guarantee you, without a bribe, without delay, without harassment, you never got a telephone connection in the country. So no ACB, no CBI, nobody acted here. No CRPC is involved here. So the biggest area is that. But having said that, the government will have a significant and critical role in any society. If you minimize the government's role, you are an idiot. What the government ought to do, the government ought to do very well. Rule of law. There is no substitute to government. Land management, there is no substitute to government. And a whole lot of areas, there is no substitute to government. Therefore, what do you do in those cases? There are graded things. The commonest problem of corruption in dealing with ordinary citizens is extortionary corruption. That means you and I are entitled to get something as citizens, often for a payment of a fee legally prescribed, and yet we have to pay a bribe, or we are harassed, we have to go to that office 25 times, 30 times, or we have to do influence peddling. This is the commonest form of corruption in the country. There is not one family which is not affected by this corruption. The best way to address is not going after an individual or two, because it is so endemic and systemic. It is to create a framework for service delivery. That's why the service delivery laws, if they are properly drafted and properly implemented, they are the most important thing for ordinary extortionary corruption which citizens face on a daily basis. There are other forms of corruption which require slightly different approaches. Technology and transparency itself, if with proper accountability mechanisms, will significantly improve. That's the work that vigilance enforcement does. How do you, in contracts, in public procurement, and decisions in relation to public assets, what can be done? And there are innovative tools like False Claims Act in the United States, where it's not merely a police officer or a vigilance enforcement agency that takes charge of these things, but the citizens are empowered legally. If you have adequate evidence, you can actually file a claim in a federal court, in a civil litigation called qui-tam litigation, and the federal court will then, upon satisfaction that what is placed before them is accurate, they will impose a penalty. They will first assess the loss to the public exchequer and impose a penalty on the wrongdoer to a tune of 3 to 5 times. And the citizen or the citizens organization is now given an incentive. 15 to 35% of the penalties go to the citizens. There are a whole lot of organizations in the US who make careers out of this. Per year, $8 to $10 billion is collected as penalties. So innovative mechanisms like that. After all these things are taken care of, the last method is the coercive steps, retribution, punishing the fellow. Whereas in popular imagination in India, we always look at punishing as the first step. It doesn't work in reality. Not in a country like India. The systemic steps to minimize the incentives, altering incentives is the most critical thing. Otherwise, you will only pretend that the problem does not exist. And of course, finally, in a country like India, political corruption. Because the kind of money that is spent in elections for vote buying and all kinds of nefarious practices. In the one by-election in Telangana recently, Huzurabad, I think, estimates of 100 crores plus are alleged to have been spent by one party alone. One assembly constituency. That's more than what a major party spends in a European country in a whole national election. And one of the poorest countries in the world. And that money is certainly not legitimate money, it's certainly not accounted money, it's all byproduct of corruption. And it feeds corruption cycle. So ultimately, the political corruption. So unless you understand, you cannot answer. So don't try for any kind of a specific answer to a problem. Understand what corruption actually is. And then find institutional mechanisms to address it. Then whatever be the question relating to corruption, you can apply your understanding, your knowledge to address that question satisfactorily.
I will also add to it what sir said. See, earlier, right now I am DG of Vigilance Enforcement. Earlier I was DG of Anti-Corruption Bureau. Before that I have worked for 4 years in CBI.
Okay, so you have seen all three.
Where I have arrested ministers, MPs, MLAs, everyone on corruption charges. So one thing that we must remember as far as corruption is concerned, a country gets the government it deserves. If the citizens of a country refuse to endure corruption, only then can corruption be reduced or eradicated. But unfortunately in our country there is a chalta hai attitude that yes, let me give some money and cross the red light, let me give some money and get the driving license, let me give some money and get this particular thing. In Europe, see, the least corrupt countries of the world are in Scandinavia. So there, this is unheard of. I went to Singapore, there corruption has almost been eliminated. So unless there is awakening of the countrymen, corruption can never be eliminated. See, you were telling that I will be the SHO and I go and find someone is indulging in corruption. You will find everyone around you is indulging in corruption. If you take steps against everyone, you will be alone in the department. The department will be empty. So as rightly told by sir, the plugging the systemic loopholes, taking away discretionary power, because discretion breeds corruption. Then there are a number of other steps also, but as sir again has said, in a very short period of time you have to tell a few points. Such questions which may definitely come, you should prepare 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 very bold, robust points you should keep in mind. These, if you tell, the interviewer will be impressed. So for such 20, 30, 50 questions, which may very likely to come, one or two of those, you can prepare answers and then just keep in mind, in case one of them comes, you will be able to impress the interview board. So that's again my take.
The thing is, don't try to remember by rote. Internalize them, think about them, own it, apply your mind and give your own interpretation. Then it becomes natural and they will be stress free. Otherwise you will be worried, my God, third point what is there, fifth point what is there. Don't allow that. No. Ultimately, you're all bright young citizens in this country. And we're all trying to solve problems. Engineering is problem solving. This is not engineering in a technological sense, but this is the problem solving. None of the problems is intractable. I slightly disagree with Bharati, saying that ultimately citizens, yes, of course, it's ultimately citizens. But if you wait for citizens to be awakened overnight, it will not happen. It's chicken or egg situation. There are institutional responses to significantly improve. When Bharati is there, there is no corruption in some organizations. Why? When somebody is there, there is corruption. The same citizenry. That means institutions and incentives matter. Corruption can be curbed. You must have an optimistic vision, but not a grandiose vision. Not that Arvind Kejriwal went to Punjab and 1 week corruption has gone. That is not an optimistic vision. That's a grandiose vision. It's a silly notion. But people matter. Institutions matter. If you do the right thing in the right way. While you will not be able to eliminate altogether, you will significantly be able to make an impact. Why is it some people are lionized even today? 30, 40 years after you was in a district or some other capacity, people still remember them. They venerate them. Why? They made a difference. Because difference is possible. So problems are not intractable, but they are not easily amenable to instant solutions. So you must have that perspective, own them, think a little about it. It's worthwhile, trust me. See, ultimately, some of you will be selected. And there's no dearth of officers in this country because everybody wants to be in the IAS or IPS in this country, right? How do we care as people of this country? What we want is what matters. Ultimately, at the end of the day, whoever is selected, what's happening to the country? So think of it as preparation for the future. Think a little bit. Don't make it an examination-oriented thing. If I were an examiner, I would be very disappointed if the guys come with prepared answers and come up with 1, 2, 3 and try to impress me. I would be deeply disaffected by that. I would want intelligent, thoughtful Indians who care for the future of this country.
So one debate today is that has IAS failed the nation? So
I have no doubt about it.
So,
Civil services in general have failed, IAS in particular have failed. There's no doubt about it. But again, the other day, Subba wrote a piece. It's not insightful enough, but it is truthful. But he should have gone further in examining what happened. He is stopped short at a certain stage. His imagination didn't go because Subba is still a bit bureaucratic in his approach. Recruitment is not the problem. I'm not saying it because you guys are appearing for the exam. On the whole, of course, we can always complain about recruitment. There's no perfect model of recruitment, but we are doing a pretty good job. Post-recruitment, there are 3 fundamental flaws in the IAS. In particular, the IAS. In general, civil services, but in particular, IAS. The first is no specialization. That's why never give up pursuit of specialization. To pretend that you know everything under the sun, today you can be banking secretary, tomorrow you can be defense secretary, day after tomorrow you can be education secretary, is nonsensical. I became the head of a bank, two cooperative banks, Apex banks in Andhra Pradesh, without knowing a thing about banking. With zero knowledge. The banks survived, in fact they thrived, but that's a miracle. That's not the way you should run our institutions. Specialization, lack of specialization is a disaster. The second is monopoly of positions. If all key positions in government are monopoly for a certain group of people, and they're not open to the brightest Indians, some of you will make it, some of you will not make it to civil services. It doesn't mean that those who don't make it are any inferior. In fact, very often they're better. Supposing in a certain area you developed expertise, you're hugely successful, you have tremendous ideas. If 15, 20 years later you are not capable of being head of an organization in government to transform it, just because at the entry point you didn't join the IAS, it's a disaster for the country. It is Brahmanism again. What is Brahmanism? You impute a virtue by birth, not by merit, not by hard work, not by accomplishment, by birth. That is fundamentally wrong, is it not? Now, IAS is Brahmanism. Because entry is determining your future, not your work there, not your output, not your outcome. So, monopoly of all the key positions is a disaster. There must be choice for the key positions in a certain manner. And finally, a lifelong tenure is a disaster. Once you enter the civil services, no matter how rotten the fellow is, no matter how incompetent the buffoon is, unless he is found with a smoking gun, oftentimes even when he is found with a smoking gun, he will continue to simply rise in the ranks and become special chief secretary or something else, even chief secretary in fact, or cabinet secretary. Then why will there will be improvement? Armed forces have a better system. Our friend is armed force services. Whatever be their faults, they have a system. After a certain level, there are no automatic promotions. You have to generally, it's a pyramidal structure. From 100 you have to pick up 10, therefore 90, no ODM attached, you retire gracefully, you do your own thing in life. So you must have a system whereby after some years there is a screening and then next level only X number go up. And those who are found wanting, without any ODM, without any insult, you bid a goodbye to them and they do their own things in life. So if you do these three things, the same civil services will achieve miracles because they have tremendous exposure, understanding. Recruitment is good. Some of the brightest youngsters go into civil services. But you are making morons out of them, out of most of them, within 10 years. In that sense, IAS has failed. But it need not, because it has some strengths. And therefore, I am not a great believer that if you remove all this and suddenly do something dramatic, things will improve. Don't throw the baby with the bathwater. How do you retain the strength and how do you eliminate the weaknesses? How do you strengthen it further? That should be your approach. You and I are not, even if you are a prime minister, let alone a public servant, paid public servant, you are not given the mandate of revolutionizing India, removing all employees of the country, disbanding the armed forces. That's not the way life ever works anywhere. You have to work with the tools that we have.
Sir, and as you said, IAS is a generalist role while most of us are trained to be specialists in some domain. And we are making that transition. How do we justify it? And also, there can be a question.
You don't have to be apologetic at all. In fact, I believe that is the virtue of IAS. If the IAS knows how to utilize it, the government knows how to utilize it, the diversity is a virtue. In fact, Dr. Manmohan Singh as Prime Minister, he pressurized me quite a bit to recommend entry at the post-school level and have an IA academy for 3 or 5 years training, etc., for the civil servants. And I resisted. I opposed vehemently. Because that's precisely what's wrong. You don't require people of the same kind with the same training in the IAS. We require tremendous diversity. We require engineers, we require doctors, sociologists, thinkers, literary. So people have varied backgrounds. You can bring the strength of that assimilation. It's a wrong idea to make them all into some manufactured soaps or matchboxes. It is actually the strength, and we are not utilizing the strength. So you don't have to apologize. And two, as you go higher up in management, one of you have done management, and you also applied for, you took management as optional. As you go higher and higher, it's not the domain expertise that matters. So you don't have to apologize for that. Don't be apologetic. Don't try to give a preformed answers. Tell them what your heart tells you. And if they don't like it, to hell with them. Don't be overly worried. I mean, examiners should be respected, but not venerated. Okay. I don't think you have to apologize at all for your specialist knowledge.
So the government is looking to include this lateral entry for the specialist in the administration. So
Now, just to continue, as Mr. Chatterjee said, at the field level for about 10 years or so, the current civil service structure cannot be easily replaced. In fact, that should be taken as strength, because if the IAS has any great virtue, it is this exposure. Every officer, even as a cabinet secretary, talks about when I was sub-collector, when I was a district magistrate, because that is the wealth of experience they bring to the table, understanding the political economy. But at state or national level, as you go higher, there is a case to bring expertise. At the highest level, for instance, take Manmohan Singh. What was he? He was finance secretary, Government of India. Take many other people in the finance ministries and in some of the ministries. They have done an outstanding job. Or take people like Sam Petroda, telecom. In a way, he was the progenitor of the revolution telecom sector in the country. Take somebody like Nandan Nilekani. Without his drive and dynamism, we would not have had this Aadhaar linkage and so on, Aadhaar and so on and so forth. So already we have proven cases. There are a whole lot of areas where the finest expertise is available in the country, and I believe there is competition in selection of the the heads of these agencies, and convert them into executive agencies, the British model of executive agencies with autonomy, functional autonomy, with accountability, measurement of outcomes, and each treating them as a profit center, even if there was no actual profit there, I think they'll deliver remarkably in many areas. And the few areas which are not amenable, in my judgment, those areas should go. Civil supplies has no role in the future of India. It's a 1940s hackneyed idea. Now, India doesn't need it. But then, because we are very conservative, status quo is to persevere. So I believe there is a, but what I want you to understand is, no matter what you do, the bulk of the key positions will still be occupied by the civil servants, but in a different way. Today as a right, in a monopoly situation. Tomorrow, competing and succeeding in a competitive environment, because nobody can really match the kind of exposure and experience that the traditional civil servants have at the grassroots level. But today, that is wasted because many of them, let me be blunt, many of them after some years are knowledge proof. They no longer learn, they no longer study, they have no idea what's happening elsewhere. They became what we call kopastha manduka, frogs in the well. But once they are exposed to outside talent and they compete, many of them will do exceptionally well. Once you enter services, I have no reason to believe that you will not be able to compete with anybody in the country later and flourish, provided there is competition. If you're denied competition, if you have a monopoly, I have also no doubt that many of you, unfortunately, will decline over time. The problem is not so much that IAS doesn't have talent. The problem is that the talent is not harnessed adequately.
Often it is said that privatization of PSUs is the way forward for efficient functioning. But looking back, we don't have any credible examples to back that claim. So when asked in the interview, should we give an ideological answer saying privatization helps?
No, my own view is, Mr. Chatterjee, I'm sure would have some perspective on that. You don't get into private sector versus public sector in that way. It's a very bad debate. It's a 1960s debate. My own approach is, and I'm very, very strong on this, articulate it repeatedly. The state has a very vital role to play. And that vital role is rule of law, public order, and justice. It's the first, highest. No matter how third-rate the country is, even if Putin's government is there, if you're not able to maintain, give justice, maintain order, and give, in the democratic context, rule of law, then you are unfit to be called a government. And after that, basic communities, water supply, sanitation, sewerage, and so on and so forth, and basic infrastructure. In the current context, electricity, power, and roads or transport. Communications, mercifully, government no longer can mess up. They did mess up quite a bit early on. Then quality education, particularly school level, but a framework at the higher education level also. Quality health care. If these are not provided by the government has failed. In India, the problem is not so much public sector versus private sector. It's a completely, the communists have taken over the debate and distorted our minds. Even today, we are not able to remove the muck in our minds. The problem is the government failed to perform its primary role. And we are spectacularly bad in that. If we take the top 50 countries in the world in terms of GDP, you take any of the indicators in these areas I mentioned, India ranks in the bottom 5 consistently on every single indicator. It's a shame. It's a disgrace. And a government that does not perform its role, which nobody else can perform, has no business to talk about something else, which anybody else can do. So I don't care a damn how competent a manager you are in the public sector. That's not your job. And two, there is ample, conclusive, not even compelling evidence that public sector can never perform in the long term. An individual performs. I run public sector institutions out of pride and some professionalism, hopefully, and some good fortune. We all sustain them with the full knowledge that ultimately they are going to die in a bad hand tomorrow. There is no way you can sustain public sector. We had, I'm sure Chatty remembers, or Hyderabad Alvins, the flagship. All the blue-eyed boys were there. They ran it aground. HMT, until recently, the only watches I wore in my life were 2 watches HMT. Finally, the repair fellow said, sir, you are the last fellow in the country. I don't have any capacity to repair it. So I bought some Indian watch looking very similar to that. It was the flagship of India at the time. So even if you appear to be good at a point of time, you will be doomed. I am absolutely certain. There is no exception in the world. Unless there is a natural monopoly or statutory monopoly given to public sector cannot by definition perform. So the second point is, your point is completely wrong, but that's, you don't have to argue on that. I'm not arguing even on efficiency grounds. Do your bloody job first. I'm very hard on this. If I were an interviewer, if a candidate takes a different position, I'll be very harsh. I don't allow any, because that means you don't understand governance, that you're messing up the country the way you messed up for the past 70 years. But again, take it or leave it. So this is so that they get, in a short span of time, because that's, interview is about technique of interview, but how to go about it.
But then they, if you see, my point is, as candidates means you have already taken a decision to go through with this exam, interview, and join the service, right? So obviously these questions which you raise now are important, and they will remain important for years to come after you are in the service also. So the point now I would like to insist on is, what will be helpful for you to get in first? I mean, let's be practical about it. These issues will remain, and there will be pros and cons. I mean, there will be debates and discussions, and there will be success stories and failures. Okay, Air India, for example, the whole world knows about all this. But the issue here is, for candidates who want to get into the service at any level, foreign, administrative, at whatever level you want to get in, you will have to know how the world works today and how you can improve the mechanics of the working today. Today means what? Today means technology. I mean, you have to be so upfront in your abilities to be able to handle technology and its change. Till today, we have not decided, for example, how much data we should have on iCloud. See, this is, somebody can ask you, some IT from the IT side, somebody can say that, do you know that India is not part of the world information system or world cyber system? Why? Because all the time we are saying internal and national security, and getting out of putting our databases in the international, in the iCloud. Now, has it been good or bad? See, this is something which you will realize that it has been good. If all our data, or whatever, like say, Hungary, or say to some extent Russia, if all our data was outside, it could have been dangerous. You know what's happening with hacking. It could have been, the whole dark web could have taken it over. So national security or internal security is an argument, pro and con. So all the time there will be always a debate going on. So don't think that you have solved everything. What has to be done as candidates is for you to get in first. And to get in, you will have to go according to the norms of the day. And I feel that technology is number one. You have to be very, very up with technology and the change in technology. Management, you have to again get very, very understanding of governance. First of all, there is a whole perspective on governance. They call it good governance, as if bad governance is also governance. No, there is nothing called good governance. There's only governance, right? Now, how many of you know in what way you define governance, or whatever you say, you can call it good governance? You are getting into governmental management, okay? But you should know there are 12 principles. Now these 12 principles, if you go through them, you'll notice that they are very, very Western. They are not Eastern. So, as a candidate, I would like to throw this up to you to say which are the out of these 12 principles, which are the ones you will follow, which will give you a perspective which will cover both East and West, because that's the kind of perspective you have to have. Do you know which are the 12 principles? Can you at least mention 3, 4, 5 of them? Anyone?
Transparency.
Good.
Responsiveness.
Okay, these two are very essential for East and West or not? China has managed without either. But I'm not saying it's very good, but these are the, see, you have to be very clear that both work. Both work in different circumstances. Non-transparency, opacity, non-transparency, non-accountability, single party governance, that also works. Fascism also works. I mean, you know what, Trump and O'Brien, they can give a lot of trouble. They are giving trouble. So is it only liberal democracy or which are the other accountability you mentioned? Transparency. Good. Participation. Therefore democracy. Participation means democracy, right? Therefore democracy. So only democracies work. You can't say yes or no. So therefore you have to have a very strong idea of governance. What do you mean by governance, which should be applicable both East and West? Chinese won't agree with these 12 principles. They may agree with 1 or 2, but not 12. So this is just as an example I'm saying that always I feel as candidates, don't take a full position straight away. I mean, if you take a position like Jay is saying, good, it's definitely, I mean, he has a very strong opinion and I respect that. But I'm only saying, from your perspective, you must realize that the interview board or the committee will have both sides. It's not that only one group will be coming, you know, all who say that, you know, public sector has not worked. In fact, public sector has worked all over the world, some places, in dealing with certain things, not in everything. You can't make chappals and scooters. Government should not get into that kind of business. But there are certain areas which can become a monopoly, terrible monopoly, in case it is only with the private sector. There are certain difficult areas to be just loosened out and given, like defense production and on things like that. But I would like to highlight this only one point, that when it comes to your interview or your not your exams but your interview, you will have to understand that there are two sides to the coin and to the picture. That I just wanted to mention that.
So a general thing I just wanted to suggest, there may be questions from your background as well as from your state. I think most of you are from Telangana or AP, but some will be from outside also. You are from another state, no? Telangana only. Everyone is from Telangana and AP? Anyone from outside? Okay. So if all of you are from AP or Telangana, then definitely you can expect questions on the current situation or specific, some problem which is specific to AP and Telangana. Questions may also be asked about something that as someone hailing from Telangana or AP, you were supposed to know. For example, I am from West Bengal, I am a Bengali. I was asked, at that time left front government was there. So they asked about the left front government was credited with land reforms. So they asked me about land reforms movement in West Bengal. So that is one part where you can never fail. There may be someone who is a Telugu in the board. So expectations will definitely be there that some basic issue about Telugu culture, Telugu language, something which every Telugu should know. If you are not knowing or if you are unable to respond properly, that will definitely be taken as a negative. So please keep in mind, brush up your this local knowledge and about how you are going to answer questions related to local issues. For example, say there is in AP there is a issue called people are talking about financial issues like financial emergency. They may ask you, what do you mean by financial emergency? What are the different type of emergencies that Indian constitution talk about? In Telangana, so say Mission Bhagirath. So they may ask you something about similar issues that are very current topics in Telangana or AP. So just keep in mind.
Sir, speaking of state-specific questions and also about governance, there was a recent demand for a new constitution altogether. So what is your perspective on it?
Again, I have very strong views. So I don't think there's any room for interpretation or our constitution is a pretty sound document. I have no doubt. I'm not saying it in a hackneyed sense. In a remarkably diverse society, it's an extremely liberal document, a consensual document. And it's a flexible constitution which allows you to amend when necessary. I think we amended it 104 times or maybe even more. I don't remember the latest amendment number. No, it's past 104. 104 for sure, after that I forgot. So, and barring one or two deficiencies in my judgment, for instance, the governance institution, we don't need in this form. We can change that. But a bigger change, local government should have been included in the Schedule 7 without overstructuring. So these are technical issues that can be overcome, and many of them are mistakes committed subsequently. Fundamentally, the Constitution is a sound document, and as a person who has studied intimately the Constitution and the governance of the country and being a lifelong reformer, I don't see the Constitution as an obstacle at all in transforming India. It's one of the great myths. And in fact, in some ways, we've improved, even from the federal point of view, KCR's point of view. The Constitution has improved remarkably in the last 25 years. The practice has improved. Article 356 is no longer really abused. On occasional something may happen, but generally it's now a dead letter. Government of India's role in investments has now become practically zero. The transfer of resources is much more non-discretionary and fair and objective. It was always reasonably good, but it's much better today. And the regional parties are important, and no government in Delhi can write roughshod over them for political reasons. And private investment has become such an important thing that the states are in charge of their destiny. So to say that the Constitution is an obstacle to either economic growth or decentralization or federalism is a very skewed understanding. Today also Stalin wrote a piece, at least no, in the Hindu, they published excerpts of his speech. I agree with Stalin in a general sense. I'm a great federalist in the sense that I want state governments and local governments to be strong. But to say that the country is getting centralized is more a style issue than substance. A certain prime minister may have a certain acerbic style. We confuse that with substance. There is no reason to believe that in any way there is over-centralization constitutionally in the country today. These are all hyperbolic reactions, either lack of understanding or for grandstanding, political grandstanding.
So adding to your question, immediately the something that will come to our mind is Keshavananda Bharati. Have you heard of him? Who is Keshavananda Bharati? Anyone? So I am talking about Keshavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala. The case that gave us the principle that basic structure of the constitution cannot be amended. So therefore, if you say Keshavananda Bharati, you say he is a monk from Kerala, but you don't talk about the case itself, then that means your understanding is flawed. We know, all of us should know as administrators or future administrators that this is a landmark case which told us that the basic structure of the constitution cannot be amended. And what are the basic structure, which criteria form the basic structure of the constitution of India? Anyone? You have to be confident. This is one of the basic questions. What else? So we have to look at the preamble. So preamble tells us that India will be a secular, socialist, democratic republic. So, republican form of government, secular, socialist, democratic. Then as Sarah said, separation of powers, you have also mentioned a number of points. So, all these are basic structure, constitute the basic structure of constitution, and this cannot be amended. So, we can think of any number of amendments of the constitution in future also, but without touching the basic structure.
Socialist is not basic structure.
Socialist is not basic.
It's imposed and it's an economic philosophy. Yes. Nobody takes it seriously. You must define it in your own. My definition of socialism is education and healthcare. So, socialism cannot be basic structure.
The remaining all are basic structures.
Sir, AP government has come up with the idea of 3 capitals, saying that this would lead to developmental decentralization.
These are all red herrings. I'll be surprised if the interview board wants to examine that. First of all, it's not decentralization, it's deconcentration. We must not confuse the deconcentration with the decentralization, because we are hopelessly illiterate in this country. We use expressions very casually. And second, in the public mind and in this whole debate, there's a confusion between economic growth of a city and the political capital. We identified them together, because that's why it's happening, unfortunately, because government has become the Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva of everything. So, we must, the growth of Amaravati as a greenfield city must be dealing from where the capital is. As far as the capital is concerned, the High Court gave a verdict, and I went through the judgment very carefully. It's a surprisingly lucid argument. Actually, of late, I find most courts gave third-rate judgments. This is actually a surprisingly lucid judgment. And therefore, the only recourse now is Supreme Court, and if Supreme Court decides whatever it is, that is final. And I don't think we should go really more into that. My own view is that it's better to have the legislature and executive at the same place. The judiciary need not be, because judiciary is not really functioning in coordination with the government on a day-to-day basis. Allahabad High Court is a good example. Lucknow is the capital, Allahabad High Court, but there's a Lucknow bench. But several offices need not be in the same place. Heads of department, there are 50, 60 heads of departments. If you have a sericulture head of the department, and Mr. Chatterjee knows that very well, there's no reason why you should have it in Amaravati or Hyderabad. You can have it in Anantapur or someplace. If you're mining, you can have somewhere else. So that kind of a deconcentration is better than this capital. This is a political ploy. It's nothing to do with the deeply thought out issues and state's future. It is just, no, that party did this party did something. It's all politics. We shouldn't get into that, in my view.
Sir, what are the true steps that we can take for true decentralization of administration? So, how we should reform the...
What do you mean by decentralization of administration? First define that.
So, administration should be close to the people.
Yes.
Not by the people.
That's the point. Mandal is administration closer to people. But is it true decentralization? So that's the point. Is it by the people or by somebody else for the people, allegedly?
Allegedly for the people.
By the people and for the people.
See, again, you will find divergence of opinion here.
What about this amendments? Rajiv Gandhi amendments. What are the 91st?
73rd, 74th.
74th amendment. This has not been implemented. See, 73rd and 74th amendment, if you go into those two amendments, that's all. One is urban, the other is rural. The whole of Panchayati Raj, the conceptual, which is right from community development time of the 1950s, Nehru's times, it is a fantastic structure. I mean, you have given, but you have not given them any functions, you have not given them any people, any staff, you have not given them any funds. Everything is taken away by the states, thinking that it will become a deal between the third tier, which is the Panchayat tier, and the central government. So the state will become cipher zero. So why control them? Let's control the panchayats. That is the reason why. It's a power play, politics. Why Panchayat Raj has not taken off. Similarly, you look at the urban 74th amendment, the urban side is also like that. There are, even for area where I have worked most of my life as Most 17 years of my life I've spent in environment and forest area. There also, again, 74th Amendment gives the municipality all the powers of the Pollution Control Board. But the Pollution Control Board has the capacity to throw the ball back in the municipal basket, saying it's their problem, not ours. They'll throw it at the Pollution Control Board, saying that this is what our amendments have enabled, rather than actually being properly implemented by the states. So the thing is that it's not that our laws are weak or anything. Most cases, laws are very good. Rules are very strong and good. But someone has to be there to implement it, and that's you, and that's us. And we should be allowed to work also. I mean, every politician is not like him. I mean, most politicians are not like him. And that's what, Lok Satta was doing extremely well. Now, of course, there is a chance of Aam Aadmi Party having bits and pieces of old Lok Satta's principles, which they have now adopted. I hope they don't change. I mean, I really hope their philosophy and culture does not change. But it's something which India needs. Then you will probably get constitutional governance.
Let me add to that perspective a little bit. One of the great tragedies of India is Ambedkar's reluctance to allow local governments to flourish. And he had good reason. Ambedkar quite rightly described villages as dens of casteism and corruption. He was not wrong. But he did not have the imagination to recognize that there could be a different local government other than the traditional village. See, if you take that argument to the logical conclusion, Ambedkar argument, that means India is unfit for democracy. Because India is a den of casteism. It's nonsensical. So if a traditional village, for a variety of structural reasons, is too casteist and hierarchical, and therefore democracy will not take roots, and that's a very sound argument, I agree with that. The way to address that is twofold. Urbanization, by definition, will force people to integrate and think a little better. And two, aggregation in rural areas, if rapid urbanization is not possible, so that once the numbers are bigger and go beyond the traditional habitats, and some of the traditional attitudes can be overcome by the needs of modern society. As a result, we paid lip sympathy in the directive principles, never institutionalized local governments. When they were institutionalized in late 50s and 60s, in some states like Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh, they did a remarkably good job, I can guarantee you. I'm a product of that. I went to a Panchayat Samiti school, I went to a Zilla Parishad school. Those leaders were exceptional. My Zilla Parishad chairman, when I was a school kid, he was Zilla Parishad chairman. When I was the district magistrate, he was Zilla Parishad chairman. When I was Lok Satta leader, he was my closest supporter and friend in fighting for local governments and some other causes. He passed away some years ago. That generation did a phenomenal job. Later, in the 70s, centralization took roots in the country. Indira Gandhi, centralization, emergency. Post-emergency, some half-hearted attempts were made, some Ashok Mehta committee, nothing much happened. Rajiv Gandhi was well-intentioned, but they created a monstrosity of constitutional amendment. It created over-structured, underpowered, confused local governments. Well-meaning. So good intentions don't make good outcomes. The design is all important. Nowhere in the world is the structure of local governments decided by the Constitution, federal Constitution. Nowhere in the world. India is the sole exception. In fact, in many federal countries, even the state legislature elections and executive formation is decided by the state constitutions. But local governments, unthinkable, such a detailed 7,700 word verbose thing. Well-meaning. So, and more important, underpowered. In the structure, very rigid, shall, ye, wo. In terms of what they do, if the state legislature so wishes that they may, this became our undoing. But even within that, ideally you must amend the Constitution. I worked very hard. We came this close for a variety of reasons that didn't happen. Now I don't think it will happen for a long time. But we have to figure out ways of energizing the local governments, empowering them with accountability. For instance, can we aggregate villages so that their economies of scale and some of the caste and other factions and all, they don't play a dominant role? Can we make urban India more central? Can we have in situ urbanization? We have to have innovative tools, but we must empower because of two reasons, and these are important for your generation. Because now we see phenomenal crisis enveloping states. Number one, unless there is a clear link in the minds of the voter between the vote she gives and the consequences that follow at a personal level, our democracy will continue to be moribund. We'll pretend to have a democracy which is dysfunctional. This vote buying. Andhra, Telangana are almost the leaders in this terrible, and Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are not far behind. Much of India is following suit, unfortunately. And two, the fiscal crisis enveloping states. Delhi is a little better because there are some professional norms and some systems in place, but states are completely going awry. Now, you cannot change it unless people understand that link between the taxes they pay and the services they receive. When they don't believe they don't receive any services, they are looking for short-term maximization. That's why freebies are now so popular. And if a party says, I will not give freebies, that party will lose hands down. But we have to find a way out. One way is the technical way. I am fighting very hard for a FRBM Act expansion to put a ceiling on freebies. And I hope it will happen in the next few years, just as we had wisdom in the country to try and bring in a FRBM Act and extend it to the debts, etc. But that's a short-term fix, a technical fix. You require a long-term political fix. That cannot happen unless, I keep giving the example of the apartment in which I live. Every month I pay the maintenance fee. We've all chosen somebody to take care of the affairs there. And if my elevator does not function, if the water supply is not there to the apartment, if the parking is not good, watch and water is not good, I'm going to holler. It's not about the country and Bharat Mata and Constitution. It's about my day-to-day necessities. And if that fellow says, I'll give you 100 rupees a month, JP Saab, you keep quiet, I'll slap him. It's my money. I want this damn lift to function. You're giving me 100 rupees a month. What I do? But the people are not enabled to understand. Local governments are schools for democracy. And therefore, our democracy is illusory. Mr. Chatterjee talked about our being a democracy. Truthfully, in some ways, China is more democratic than India. Just vote and shout will not make a democracy. A lot more is required. Because we pretended that these alone are democracy. We are exaggerating our virtues as a democracy. We are forgetting many elements of democracy: rule of law, genuine self-governance and empowerment, self-correcting institutional mechanisms. Without them, democracy is extremely flawed. So it's not so much democracy. The moment you define democracy only in a certain way and then pretend you are democracy and others are not democracies, you miss the point altogether. That's in fact the great debate in the world today. We are underestimating China or Singapore or South Korea or Taiwan. They are not democracies in the traditional sense, at least for a long period of their history they have not been. But they have many elements of a sound democracy and good governance embedded in their culture and institutions, whereas we have not. And empowered but accountable. I have no illusions about the people. I'm not romantic about the people. Accountable local institutions with self-correcting mechanisms is the only way forward for the country. Otherwise, we'll continue for the next 35 years. By the time you can become people of our age, we'll continue to muddle through and be defensive about what is happening and pretend that everything is all right. We are underperforming. We have done well in some ways. We have done remarkably well, unexpectedly well. Most people didn't give us a chance in 1950. In some respects, we are exceptional. But that does not gloss over the realities that in many areas we are underperforming, hopelessly. We can do much better. We should do much better. And not the only one, but one important ingredient is making people understand what it means. The best way to make them understand is in local governments, properly empowered with accountability and sensible design.
And capacity building and training. There is total lack of training and interest in training the local government to be able to handle their own affairs. Long ago, this is something interesting for you. You could think of, talking about it in the interview. There was something called TRISEM. Now, nobody will know about it. If you go to the internet also, they may not have it anymore. Yeah, this is something of the 1970s, end 60s actually, when we were in service. Now, you know what it was? Take the young people, young. I mean, nobody is saying who's young, who's not. Nobody goes to check with the age. No, young. The young in the village will be trained in a particular important function for the village. That is, rewiring of burnt out electric motors, borewell repair, repairing borewells, repairing electrical connections, circuitry, lathe machines used for repairing furniture, metal furniture and other things. Anyway, these things, there was a workshop required where the training would be given to all the young people. Most young people came there, mostly all unemployed of course. They were given food and training, maybe 1 month or 2 months. After that they were let loose. They were allowed to collect fees of very little money, whatever they wanted, whatever the people were willing to pay. They were paid.
In fact, that is at the heart of the political crisis of India. The MLA has now become the uncrowned king of the constituency. And he's not a bad fellow. The poor chap is overburdened now. In the absence of effective local government, he has foolishly taken on himself the responsibility to deliver without the power. He has no power. But he has informal power because he decides the government will survive or disappear. Therefore, nuisance value. You cannot make things happen through nuisance value. And because you have to make some things happen politically, otherwise you're not viable as a political party, MLAs have to be given informal power. And power without accountability is a disaster. So, we have a messed up system. This is unique to India, utterly dysfunctional. And we are thinking it's normal, natural. It's not. It's unnatural, it's dysfunctional, it is debilitating to the country.
There was a criticism from our Vice President, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, that our education system is corrupted due to Macaulay's education and there is a need for saffronizing.
No, see, you don't take them too seriously. So people blame Macaulay. Actually, poor Macaulay, if you go to the minutes, he was not being anti-Indian at all. He was saying these are the people who have imbibed the best values of humanism and modernity, and they will be prepared for self-governance. That's exactly what happened. Who were the freedom fighters? The people who were schooled in this kind of a thing, imbibed the best values and improved upon the masters and then fought valiantly. So it's easy for us to use such symbolisms in the country. I don't want to use words like saffronization. I don't even understand, frankly. But earlier we discussed a robust view of history without glossing over, at the same time reconciling without retribution is perhaps a worthy thing. But one thing that he's been talking about in education is much more germane about the language issue, medium of instruction. In India, there is a lot of debate going on. Needlessly, again, we make it a cultural issue where it should be academic issue. My view is not cultural at all, it should be academic. It's very simple. Supposing Mr. Chatterjee and I, we speak to you brilliantly in Chinese language. Would you get anything in these 2 hours? You are all some of the brightest youngsters of this country at an advanced stage of learning. How will a kid learn something in a language that she does not understand? So this whole language, medium of instruction issue is a no-brainer. It's not mother tongue, Indian language, foreign language, nothing. It's whether the child understands the language enough to be able to grab the concepts. Instead of going into that, we make it mother tongue, Bharat, or English is important, AO and all that. Therefore, and now in any case, if you tell people that no English medium or something, there will be resistance. They say, oh, your kids can go to English medium, but not my kids. So we are too far gone. So my way is, pretend it's English medium. Don't worry too much about the labels. But at least 4 or 5 years at school, teach the concepts in a language that the child understands. In government schools, that necessarily means the local language. In a private school where the parents are from a wealthy and educated background, the kids already learn to speak English, maybe start off with English. So I'm not talking of mother tongue or some other tongue, everything is mother tongue. But start English as a language, there's nothing wrong from the beginning. After 4 or 5 years, make it bilingual. By the time you come to high school, 9th, 10th, etc., Increasingly, they will be comfortable with English, but with a conceptual clarity, the sound foundations. Anything else is a nonsensical approach. So I don't think some issues need to be made doctrinaire. Whatever works best. I am absolutely certain you cannot teach a child that does not know a language any kind of education in that language. I mean, even using that, I have to say this sentence is shameful. It has to be the language the child understands, is comfortable with, to grasp concepts. Saffronization, see, honestly, I don't know how to answer that. Obviously, I would not be in favor of giving any kind of a color. So the best way to approach, an honest way to approach, I don't want dishonest approach also. There are so many strands of history, sometimes for a variety of reasons, some strands have been ignored. It's a fact. Some of the criticism of the BJP wallas is understandable, even if it's exaggerated. There were several strands, for instance, the Young Bengal movement, a rationalist, Henry Vivian Derozio, etc. He died at the age of 21, but still his name is a part of history. At 21, he made a mark, imagine. Then the terrorists, you might call them freedom fighters, but the violent insurrectionist movements, including Arvind Ghosh and Ras Bihari Ghosh and many other people, what they did. That's another story. It had an impact. The people like Chapekar and others from Hindutva front, they became terrorists. The other ones are socialist front. The first terrorist act was in Pune. Chapekar brothers, they killed a collector called Rand. What for? Anybody has an idea? There was plague in Pune. The poor collector tried to save the population. They relocated them, isolated them because of the pandemic. In those days, no antibiotics, therefore it was much, much, much worse than COVID. And then in our society, if 1,000 people are put together in one camp, given food from community kitchen, caste was violated. Therefore, Chapekar brothers felt humiliated. They killed the collector for that reason. We still call it freedom struggle. Actually, it's very difficult. But then, no. In a way, they were fighting against the alien supremacy. Irrationally, yes. Then you have Hindu Mahasabha. Then you have Veer Savarkar and others. We have, of course, the traditional Congress movement. So it is a fact that some of these are underemphasized. And therefore, if some of these people are saying, look, recognize the space for all these people and understand that we today are an integrated amalgamation of all this, that's not a bad idea. I have no quarrel. But beyond that, it's not desirable. So maybe you can have a nuance in the answer and say there are so many strands in a diverse society. As earlier Dr. Bharati said, for instance, the history outside of Delhi Sultanate or Delhi Empire is generally ignored. If supposing that has to be taken into account, Vijayanagara Empire in the south, for instance, or some other kingdoms, then that gives a more balanced appreciation of a vast continental country with 1/6 of mankind and the greatest diversity on planet Earth. I would urge you, this is one area where I would like you to deflect a little bit gently but honestly. Don't get into too much of that. Because I think as a country, I'm absolutely certain we cannot survive unless we are truly integrationist, truly capable of absorbing everything and respecting everybody. And two, I have a suspicion that interview board will be peopled by a significant number who would be sympathetic to the saffronizing view. Therefore, you must speak the truth without antagonizing them. This is the only area where I would like you to be thoughtful, but truthful. Never speak untruth. Ultimately, you will be caught. I truly believe that. Maybe I am old-fashioned. You ignore it if you like. In life or in interview, never speak untruth. It's not worthwhile lying at all, because that's corroding your soul. But that you emphasize those aspects of truth that are relevant to a certain context, there's nothing wrong with that. But it said, I hope they'll not ask you a question like saffronization. That will be very improper on their part. If they do ask, you think about it from your own perspective. I'm sure you're all students of history in some way or the other. Have a more balanced approach to it. But even today, you are seeing so many perspectives. So that's why I said, ultimately, you have to make a choice, not only for the interview today, but in life. What works for the country? What is the best? Is there some cumulative knowledge we acquired on the basis of the past experience, or we simply to go by old shibboleths? Have they served us well, or do we have to change? You know my bias. What served us well, let's continue. I told you about the Constitution. What did not serve us well, let us not pretend that they work. It's nonsensical. I'm pretty clear in my mind. Evidence to me is conclusive. But it's the way you like to see it.
Budget for education, healthcare.
No. I never talked about it.
So why is
I'm
it?
actually opposed to that.
Okay.
I'm arguing in education, the traditional shibboleth is 6% GDP. Rubbish. India is spending more than what we should compared to global standards. Even yesterday I was doing comparison. We are spending more than all those people. We confuse child care services and others in those countries. They spend 2.5% GDP on child care services in the West. Mercifully, because of strong families, India doesn't do all that. Education schools, they spend about 3%. We are spending 2.8 to 3% ourselves, but with only 60% of the kids in government schools. They have near 100% in government schools. We are forgetting the private sector, parents pay. The exchequer is not paying. So on per capita basis, relative to GDP, India is paying more on education than the Western countries. One of the great myths of India, money is not the issue in education. We are already overspending. Andhra Pradesh is spending 95,000 rupees per child, 90,000 rupees per child. Telangana is spending 65,000 rupees per child. More is not necessary. Better is necessary.
So why are we not able to see considerable change when it comes
I'll come to that a little later. But then healthcare, you're right. We are hopelessly underspending. We're at 1%, 1.1%. We are the worst in the world. 75% private expenditure, mostly out of pocket, impoverishing 60 million people a year. 6 crore people a year descend into poverty annually on account of poor health care. It's bigger than most countries of the world, the number of people descending into poverty. Healthcare requires more spend and better spend, both. But healthcare spend is far better than education spend in terms of the value it's giving us. Every rupee we are spending on healthcare is giving us 4 rupees return. Some cases up to 10 rupees return. I've seen some places like Parvatipuram. For rupee spent, 10 rupee value is obtained. You can actually quantify it. Healthcare, more spend, but also better design, better. We can't spend like the West. There's no way we can reach 8-9%. If you reach 2%, it's remarkable. We are not even, I'm right now fighting for 1.5%. That's how primitive we are as a country. So healthcare, more spend and better spend. Now education, there's no time to go into detail, but I'll give you a central picture and 1 or 2 additional ones. And you are all still relatively students, so you understand it better. Our education is bogus in India. You are all fine products of education despite the education system, not because of it. Only 1% of the kids in India meet the global standards. I'm talking statistically, I'm not talking exaggeration. This is real. Only 1% kids meet global standards. You are all from that 1% category. Therefore, we have an illusion that we are doing well. Once you go to United States or some other country, you become Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, or Indra Nuis or somebody, we all claim, no, fantastic. These are all 1% kids of India. About 15-20% are okay. They're not good enough. They don't meet the standards, but with some effort, even if they bloom a little later, they can match eventually. 80% have no future. Outcomes are appallingly poor. PISA survey, the global comparisons at the age of 15, which measures not your rote learning and mass copying, but actually conceptual understanding and problem solving and communication skills and logic. We are ranked second from bottom in the world. And India's response is not to participate in PISA surveys in future. Much more crude but honest surveys like ASR surveys, they show in the 8th grade, 25% kids cannot read a passage of 2nd grade difficulty. Just read, not understand. Just read. 40% kid cannot do subtraction. Not why to subtract, when to subtract, but just subtraction, 2-digit subtraction. 60% cannot do in 8th grade a division, 3-digit by a single digit, not when or why, but how. These are real numbers, hard numbers, and things are either stagnant or getting worse. We are appallingly bad. 50% kids in Telangana cannot read time from looking at a watch. 50% between 14 and 18 years of age. Real numbers. Some state may be 40%, but it's not lower than 40%. 80% can tell you the hour. Only 50% are able to give you the hour and the minute. 40 to 50% cannot measure the weights in a market. Things are appallingly bad. So it's not money, it's not buildings. All these are necessary, I don't mind, but that's a lie. The central issue, and I want you all to internalize this both as citizens and future public administrators, if you want to transform education. The central issue is measurement of success, definition of success and measurement of success. Because India values education. Parents, all your parents sacrificed enormously for you. You may not always recognize it. Irrespective of caste, region, religion, India has this culture of sacrificing living for the children. Government is spending hell of a lot. I already gave you some numbers. Society values education. Once you get into IIT, remember the kind of publicity generated? Now when you get into IAS or some other service, you know the kind of publicity. Nowhere in the world do you see that. Society values this. So it's not the fault with all of them. Demand side is very strong. Supply is lousy, disgusting. The central feature is our examinations. Most examinations in India, if you mug up 3 years question papers, you get first class. And nowadays you don't know how to mug up. There is rampant mass copying. If that is what is aimed at, because after all you are celebrating ranks, you are celebrating scores, society is producing ranks and scores. Supposing you have a PISA-like examination, no rote learning, no pressure, but conceptual understanding, problem solving and communication skills and logic are tested. I guarantee you, your parents, the kids, the teachers, the managements, the whole society will push the kids in that direction. The incentive is altered, provided that the examination is foolproof in the sense that now there is so much of mass copying. 25 years ago, I would not have said this. It's enough to design a test which is sensible. Today, a sensible and one with integrity. Now you have to add that, because you guys will not understand. The rampant mass copying today in school education and even in colleges is unimaginable. So both those must be addressed. And there are ways of addressing. There are so many designs of tests, wonderful tests. Your own SAT, ACT, or O-levels, A-levels, or PISA, as I mentioned. Many others. They're just perfected. In medical examinations, USMLE, outstanding testing. So we know it requires a lot of hard work, but we know it's not something unique that we have to do originally. If you do that, everything else will fall in place. Then there are a couple of things. There are many minor things like, everybody will say train teachers. Who stopped you from training them now? Tomorrow also you keep talking and training them. I have no quarrel. But these are all, we talk about them without doing, because we have no capacity. State capacity is eroded not only at the local level. There is no state capacity in India in general. We are pretending. Once you have third-rate education, where is capacity? These are the jokers who become employees of government. Once you go to government, the first thing you will find is, my God, how incompetent our system is, not how corrupt the system is, how thoroughly ignorant the employees of government are. And these are the best in competitive examinations, not only at the high levels, but a clerk or a deputy tahsildar or somebody else. These are the best. That means this is the best that education has produced in the country. That is a monumental challenge. So capacity is not a local government problem, except that in a larger entity, the capacity deficit is glossed over. Out of 10 fellows, if one fellow is competent, that fellow somehow carries the burden. We pretend as if everything is okay. Once 10 fellows are dispersed, you have nobody there to hold the baby. So it's not that local governments have less capacity and state governments or union government have greater capacity. Except in a few select areas, our governments are notoriously incompetent. They just don't know what to do. So saying I build capacity, if you build it, I'll be happy, but I don't believe it. I want altering of incentives so that the behavior changes. People try themselves. So the second thing is the complete mismanagement of the teacher-student population. In many states, you'll be surprised, those of you who are not familiar, southern states, for instance, the teacher-student ratio is 1 to 17, 1 to 16, 1 to 18. It's as good as it can be. So to pretend that I need more teachers is nonsensical. You just deploy them properly. There are schools where the teachers outnumber the students enrolled. I'm not misspeaking. I'm not saying every school has that. That the fact that there are some schools, even if there are 100 schools in the whole of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, there is nothing more disgraceful than that there are 3 kids enrolled and 4 teachers. What does it speak of our system? But without being so egregious, there are many schools where large overpopulation of the school, fewer teachers, and many other schools where 50 kids and 5 teachers exist. So rationalize this. The pretension that 20 kids make a school is nonsensical. In my book, at least 100 kids in primary school, 5 classrooms, 5 teachers is mandatory. That institutional environment itself gives you a greater capacity to manage, to monitor, to encourage, and to inspire. And it's an administrative thing. When I raised it in the assembly for the first time with all the statistics, people were shocked. In the midst of this Telangana movement and assembly not functioning, that day all the MLAs were so enthused. For 4.5 hours we debated. Then they formally institutionalized a policy of rationalizing. Until now it did not happen. Governments are committed to it, but teacher unions, this, the teacher MLCs, and then newspapers saying schools are being shut down, which is an absolute lie. So rationalizing the schools, a very simple step. And the second thing is remove the distinction between public and private. As I told you, India has the highest number of poor kids going to private schools. In the last 10 years, for instance, a significant number of kids have moved from public to private schools. Therefore, private school enrollment has increased by 4 to 5 crores in the country. Public school enrollment has declined when overall enrollment has increased. And who are the new entrants into private schools? Are they rich people? Poor people. But rich people entered long back. Upper middle class entered long back. It's the poor who are now going to private schools increasingly. All the shift is from the poor sectors. Now even private schools are not serving them well, except the high-end private schools. Other schools are ramshackle, 3,000 rupees annual fee, 250, 300 rupees monthly fee, or 500 rupees monthly fee. What kind of education can you give? But still some hope there's accountability because I made a choice. And it's even that is a little better than this. So even the poor people are sending there. So what you do is remove the distinction between public and private subject to a ceiling of fee. Let's say 10,000 or 12,000, some arbitrary number I'm giving you. If government is spending 60, 70, 80,000, why not reimburse 10 or 12,000 provided outcomes are there? Measure the outcomes very carefully. The schools that measure those standards, you reimburse the fee. You don't have to see whether they're poor or rich. It's only the poor kids that go to those schools. The better off kids go to 20,000, 40,000, 50,000, 1 lakh kids, 1 lakh schools. But focus on the outcomes. Other schools you shut down. If you do these 3 and then implement the current education policy, it's a very sound policy. For a change, the country came up with an extremely sound education policy. You don't have to go far. I would urge you to read it later on. It's a 66-page document. I also had something to do with that. In fact, I sat with the committee, Kasturangan committee, in detail. I was the first one to meet with them. I thought I would meet them for an hour. My flight was on schedule. But I spent 2.5, 3 hours with them. And in many ways, it was informed by that discussion. So that identified the problems, it showed the pathway. You only have to implement in a large enterprise with 26 crore school kids, 4 crore or 3.8 crore college kids in India. That's equivalent to population of America almost. So you can't change it by mere policy document. It has to be a massive enterprise across the country. At least the policy is in place, resources are in place. At last, long last, we understood the problem. We understand the solution. We have to make it happen. So education is complex. Healthcare is complex too, but there it's infuse funds, do a little bit of work. For a variety of reasons, it's easier to transform because the polity is ready. Education, because there are rigid attitudes, it may take a little bit hard work, but policy is in place. So both are in crisis, but crisis in different ways. Education crisis is not the same as healthcare crisis. We are overspending in education, in my view, and underachieving. We are underspending in healthcare and overachieving relative to our expenditure.
Like and subscribe Eagle Media Works.